It's time for my last word on this week's near lynch of two IDF soldiers who mistakenly ventured into the West Bank town of Jenin. Headlines here heralded the miracle which spared them from the angry Palestinian mob, while the pretty blonde soldier, her face bloodied from stones that shattered her windshield, was widely quoted in the press here as saying, "It's a miracle I'm still alive." Seriously? As much as we're all grateful that this incident didn't end in serious injury or even death, it wasn't a miracle that saved these errant soldiers. It was Palestinian police and security forces, professionally trained by the U.S., the EU, and Jordan, who brought this near tragedy to a swift end. In the chaos, an M16 was stolen from their vehicle, and that, too, was returned to Israel, courtesy of the Palestine Authority. But the average Israeli wouldn't know that, to him or her. This week's event was yet another example of ugly Palestinian incitement and murderous intentions toward the Jewish state. In mainstream Israel, it wasn't the IDF to blame for allowing its soldiers to depend on cell phone navigation apps instead of real maps. No, to the average hardline Israeli, if the IDF is to be faulted at all, it's for being too soft on West Bank Palestinians who no longer cower at the sight of an IDF vehicle in their streets. Now, in a rare interview, General Majid Faraj, the powerful Palestinian intelligence and security chief, told me that the PA on average has invented some 200 attacks each year against Israelis, not out of any love for Israel, but out of its own interests and belief that radicalization and terror hurts their quest for statehood. He took a lot of heat at the time. Newspaper caricatures depicted him as a traitor, a tool of Israeli occupation. And that interview was well before President Trump's incendiary proclamation of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, with no distinction between the western and eastern parts of the city. With no diplomatic horizon in sight, the Palestine Authority is routinely braving the growing wrath of its public to contain violence and keep prospects for a two-state peace alive. Just as Israel rightly takes the West Bank Authority to task for the inflammatory school books and other words and deeds fueling public anger, Israel has a responsibility to educate its own public when that same authority acts responsibly and in ways that are conducive to coexistence. So let's be clear. It wasn't a miracle that saved those two IDF soldiers this week, but professional Palestinian officers on the scene, risking the scorn of their peers for their government's continued commitment to security coordination with Israel. And that's my last word. Please join us again next week for a new edition of Strictly Security at I-24 News. And until then, wishing you a safe and pleasant evening from the Chappaport.